You are the least qualified FBI director in the history of the FBI. Those weren't the words of a partisan critic. They came from Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett before she systematically dismantled Kash Patel's credibility piece by piece. What you're about to see isn't just a congressional grilling. It's a black woman confronting the reality that white supremacists feel safer than she does under his leadership.
I definitely take issue with a number of decisions that Donald Trump makes, especially when it comes to the people that he decides to appoint to very important positions, including this one, because I did have to make sure that I wasn't going crazy. But when I say that you are the least qualified FBI director in the history of the FBI, that is real, because you are the only one that never even served with the FBI prior to joining, yet we are supposed to believe that
That's
you are
false.
the greatest thing since sliced bread. I didn't ask you a question. Now, what I want to go through is to talk about why you are a failure and why, honestly, we just need to tell you bye-bye. I know that you got a little upset and you put on your show for your boss because it seems like you're trying to save your job when it came to talking to Senator Booker yesterday. But let's go through some of your failures. So before you were even confirmed, and I think one of my colleague from Georgia, pointed out that you are already targeting career officials so that you could direct illegal firings. Mind you, these cases that you were so upset about, which are the ones tied to Trump, the cases came through his handpicked FBI director. And frankly, when people sit around and say things like, oh, you know, we're happy because now we feel safe. I don't know who feels safe in this country except for the white supremacists, because I specifically as a black woman definitely don't feel safe. And frankly, my colleagues have been real nice to you today, and I applaud them, but I don't have the same demeanor because I know that multiple colleagues on this side of the aisle have faced death threats. In fact, somebody tried to kill one of my colleagues. And frankly, I don't know if this FBI or under your leadership, if those people would have been caught. I don't have any confidence in you. And if we start talking about the reasons that I lack confidence, we could start with you not just wanting to acknowledge some simple facts. Simple facts like the vast majority of the threats are coming from right-wing extremism. And I know my colleagues have tried to stress this, but I decided that I would maybe do it in a different way. Number one, I have a couple of UCs. Kim Buck, one of multiple Republicans receiving death threats for voting against Jim Jordan as House Speaker.
Without objection.
Another one, Republican lawmaker says she received death threats after voting against Jim Jordan in Speaker's race.
Without objection.
In addition, there was another one from another colleague who now is leaving Congress because they said that they were calling his wife anonymously and threatening her life to the extent that she ended up sleeping with a firearm.
Without objection.
Okay, so here's the deal. How are we supposed to have confidence when you're sitting up here telling the Senate yesterday that it will take you 14 years before you can get the FBI fully staffed to do their jobs? You're also now redirecting resources so that they can go and play ICE agents on the streets. You're getting rid of your most qualified people. And even when it came down to somebody that you consider to be a friend, you were posted up having some fancy dinner to the extent that you posted not only once erroneously, you posted twice erroneously as it relates to catching somebody. And then you want to go and say, let me take a victory lap. Because honestly, if it wasn't for parents deciding that they were going to turn in their child, it seems like y'all wouldn't have got there, even though he literally confessed online. So I'm confused about what it is that the FBI is doing except for trying to put on a show for the apprentice or whatever you want to call him. The day after all of this took place, there was domestic terrorism that was taking place at HBCUs. They were targeted. Yet I didn't hear anything from the FBI about what was going on. And again, black people kept saying, how did we end up in this? because the numbers are so very clear that white supremacy is a problem. And honestly, I've not heard anything out of you today that makes me believe that you're going to do anything about the white supremacy problem, the one that is leading to children being killed, children being shot, as well as members of their community as they're worshiping in their churches.
What Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett delivered wasn't just a congressional hearing performance. It was a masterclass in accountability that exposed the dangerous intersection of unqualified leadership and institutional capture. Her methodical takedown of Kash Patel revealed 3 critical failures that should alarm anyone who believes the FBI exists to protect all Americans, not just those in political favor. The opening salvo, "You are the least qualified FBI director in the history of the FBI," wasn't hyperbole. It was a verifiable fact that cuts to the heart of institutional competence. Every previous FBI director brought law enforcement experience to the role. Patel's primary qualification appears to be loyalty to Donald Trump, which transforms the Bureau from an independent investigative agency into what Crockett accurately identified as a personal enforcement arm. When Crockett detailed the death threats against Republican lawmakers who opposed Jim Jordan's speakership bid, she was illustrating a pattern that Patel either cannot or will not acknowledge. Right-wing extremism represents the dominant domestic terrorism threat in America today. Her methodical presentation of evidence, UC after UC, documenting threats against Republicans themselves, demolished any pretense that this is merely partisan positioning. The extremism problem is so severe that members of Patel's own party are fleeing Congress because their families live in fear. The resource allocation critique reveals how quickly institutional priorities shift under political pressure. Patel's admission that full FBI staffing would take 14 years while simultaneously redirecting agents to immigration enforcement exposes a deliberate weakening of core investigative capacity. You cannot simultaneously claim to prioritize national security while gutting the workforce needed to execute that mission. This isn't bureaucratic inefficiency, it's strategic institutional degradation. Crockett's personal testimony as a Black woman who feels less safe under Patel's leadership than white supremacists do represents the human cost of institutional capture. When the nation's top law enforcement officer cannot acknowledge basic threat assessments about right-wing extremism, communities of color are left vulnerable. Her reference to HBCU targeting the day after the New Orleans attack highlights how quickly marginalized communities are forgotten when political theater takes precedence over actual security. The botched social media posts about the New Orleans attacker investigation that Crockett referenced aren't minor communication failures. They demonstrate how performative law enforcement prioritizes public relations over investigative integrity. When the FBI director is posting victory laps before investigations conclude, you've moved from professional law enforcement to political spectacle. The broader systemic danger Crockett identified is the normalization of incompetence in critical institutions. When the person leading federal law enforcement lacks basic qualifications and cannot acknowledge documented threat patterns, the entire justice system's credibility erodes. Career agents watch political appointees make decisions based on loyalty rather than evidence. Prosecutors question whether their investigations will receive institutional support. International partners lose confidence in American law enforcement capabilities. This hearing moment represents a larger constitutional stress test. The FBI director position requires Senate confirmation precisely because it demands independence from political pressure. When that independence is compromised through unqualified appointments driven by personal loyalty, the constitutional balance that protects civil liberties begins to collapse. Crockett's closing observation about children being killed while white supremacy goes unaddressed connects individual tragedy to institutional failure. When federal law enforcement cannot name and target the most significant domestic terrorism threat, communities pay with their lives. Her anger wasn't performative, It was the justified response of someone watching protective institutions fail the people they're meant to serve. The stakes here extend beyond any single nomination or political moment. Democratic institutions survive through competent, independent leadership that prioritizes professional standards over personal loyalty when those standards erode. As Crockett demonstrated they have with Patel, the institution becomes a tool of whoever holds power rather than a protector of constitutional principles. What Crockett accomplished in those few minutes was more than political theater. She created a record of institutional failure that demands accountability. Her systematic presentation of evidence, from threat assessments to resource misallocation to basic competency questions, built an undeniable case that this nomination represents a dangerous departure from professional law enforcement standards. The question now is whether the Senate will heed her warning or continue the institutional capture that transforms law enforcement from public protection into political weapon. Democracy depends on that choice.